morning. My name is Charlotte Dennett, and I'm here today to announce my candidacy on the progressive ticket for the Attorney General of Vermont. I have a very special guest who flew here to show his support for my endeavor, and he is the author of the prosecution of George W. Bush for murder, Vincent Bugliosi. Vermont has, unfortunately, the highest per capita losses of Vermont soldiers in the war in Iraq. It's also had, as you know, 36 town meetings where they voted to impeach President Bush.
No man, even the President of the United States, is above the law. For whatever ominous reason, this bedrock American principle, so essential to our democracy and who we are as a people, has been knowingly ignored by this nation's establishment, which in effect has decided that George Bush should not be held accountable for his monumental crime in taking this nation to war in Iraq under false pretenses. But you see, the powers that be cannot abort the wheels of justice in an individual state or control the verdict of an American jury. If they could, the America of our founding fathers would cease to exist, cease to be, and we would become a totalitarian nation. In my book here, The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder, I present evidence that proves beyond all reasonable doubt that George Bush took this nation to war in Iraq on a lie, under false pretenses, and therefore under the law. He is guilty of murder for the deaths of over 4,000 young American soldiers who have died so far in Iraq fighting George Bush's war. Not your war or my war, but George Bush's war. Here we have over 4,000 victims of this man, George Bush, young American soldiers who bravely sacrificed their lives in Iraq fighting George Bush's war. Yet in this vast land of ours, who in authority is pursuing George Bush to bring him to justice? Astonishingly, and to this nation's eternal shame and disgrace, absolutely no one. But now comes this valiant and very patriotic woman, Charlotte Dennett, who pledges to the people of this great state of Vermont that if they grant her the authority with their vote, she will have the courage and the fortitude to do what other people before her have been afraid to do, prosecute George W. Bush for murder.
I'm running for Attorney General because I think I bring a unique combination of experience. I have been for 30 years an investigative journalist, and so I know how to investigate, and I'm also tough. I'm tough on injustice, I'm tough on wrongdoing, and I think that that's something that is needed in this office during these very difficult times. I've been an attorney for the past 11 years, and as an attorney, I come out of a background of personal injury law, so that I am very much familiar with representing clients who have either actually been injured or have suffered as a result of negligence. I get very much in touch with average Vermonters and their issues. And the Attorney General in Vermont combines many different facets of helping, let's put it this way, helping the average Vermonter. We are the top, I mean, if I were elected, I would be the top consumer advocate in the state, and I think that I can bring a lot to that. I'd also be very tough as a prosecutor, and some of you may have heard that I'm actually planning, if elected, to prosecute George W. Bush for murder in Vermont. We've been living in the past 8 years under a climate of lawlessness and fear, and the lawlessness has been on the part of those who are very powerful, and the fear on the part of those who don't know what to do about it, and they seem paralyzed. Now, of course, I'm talking on the national level, but I think some of that has sort of filtered down into the states as well. And I think it's time for someone to stand up and say, enough is enough. We must hold those who have caused such harm to ourselves accountable. Now, apart from the prosecution of George Bush for murder, which I do hope we get into today, because it's far more serious than most people may realize, and Vermont does have jurisdiction to do this.
Should the federal or state government pursue criminal charges against individuals in government who may have violated laws in pursuing the war in Iraq?
The Attorney General takes an oath of office to do equal right and justice to all men and women to the best of your judgment and ability according to law. You also have to enforce Vermont statutes, the Vermont Constitution, and the U.S. Constitution. And you can only prosecute in Vermont state courts crimes under Vermont law, not under federal law or international law, and the crimes have to take place within Vermont. So this idea of trying to indict the president for war crimes, which would normally be prosecuted at the International Court of The Hague, is just not going to happen in a Vermont court.
The reason that I took this up as an issue began when I was given a copy of this book, The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder. And although the title is quite provocative and shocking, I, for one, decided that it was worth a look, particularly because of the death of over 4,000 young men and women in Iraq and over 100,000 civilians in Iraq. When I say the 4,000, I'm saying Americans. In Vermont, of course, I was thinking as I was reading through this that we have the highest per capita loss of any of the other states. So we have borne this unlawful war disproportionately. And as I read through it, I realized two things. Number one, this book is written by one of the top prosecutors in the country. And so I'm not going to go forward on this unless I have read carefully the legal framework that he has laid out and also the Vermont statutes. And I would beg to differ with Attorney General Sorrell. You can prosecute this case in Vermont. There is ample law to show it. I would establish jurisdiction two different ways. One is through conspiracy. If you can show that George Bush came to an agreement with two or more people in his administration to cause an overt act to take place in Vermont, and that overt act would be lying to the public about this war in Vermont and trying to convince our soldiers to go to that war based on a lie. That lying went through the televisions and went into the television sets of Vermont homes, and I'm sure it had something to do with convincing young people to go to war, thinking that it was their patriotic duty. And this is not to criticize them at all, but to hold this president accountable for sending so many people to their deaths based on a lie. Saddam Hussein was not an imminent threat. The evidence has been established in this book, and also he was not linked to 9/11. George Bush and his colleagues used this over and over and over again. They misled Congress. This is an outrage. Congress let us down. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party let us down. So it's up to us in the states. I would add that Dean Lawrence Velvel, who is the dean of the Massachusetts School of Law, backs me up and says, yes, Vermont has jurisdiction to prosecute. So when the rest of the country falls down, it's up to a state to go forward. And I am proud to represent the brave little state of Vermont. I hope we can go forward on this.